My name's Paul, it's actually alias Duke. How's it going? Len 303, some people might know me as that back in the day. We've been programming these units for a while now. And it's a lot of fun. Switch to track number 1. See, we've got program change going on. We've actually got a micro gate plugged in as well down the side. Get the micro gate. Right, welcome. So decided to put together a series of videos, short videos, showing the some early synthesizers, early-ish, from E-mu Dave Rossum. This is the E-mu Morpheus from 1993 era. There's also a Ultra Proteus, which is pretty much the same rack. The input into the machine is very basic. You don't need to have so many things making dynamic changes to the input to allow the output to give you a richer, broader sound. So for instance, we can set up this rack unit to respond to modulation wheel velocity and obviously the note inputs, and get a very sort of wide range of palette sounds. Just in the basic view here, you can see I've got a sequence running on to press play on these strings here, so there's a few notes, but more differently, each note has a program change, so it's actually, you can see it's switching patches there to create this more dynamic string texture. So this is the master mode. I've actually, let me zoom in for you. Tried to get the video a bit better quality, but it's a bit grainy for some reason. Anyway, so master mode, this is quite a nice place to start really, because we can, the great thing about this module, even though it doesn't have all the controls that you would expect from a modern instrument, you can still do some quite handy things in real time with this module that you can't do with many other machines on the market. Number one, you've already seen that you can play quite dynamically with program change and on multi-channels as well, a sound that plays with the built-in effects of the unit, but not only changes without really any glitching, and there's no lag really between the program changes and the notes starting. So that's number one that these modules are good at. For instance, on a Korg Prophecy, that's a mono virtual synth from around the same period, but if you change patches, there's a lag of up to half a second, so you can't really use program change in the same way that we're doing here for sound design. We can choose any sound from any bank for any of the notes that are going to play, as long as we don't overload the machine to the point that it slows down. Because if we put too many MIDI functions, if we try and play, I would say, more than 2 instruments at once on this module once it's programmed, you're going to head into problems. It's going to slow the machine down. It's really to do with the internal CPU in there. Is a 6820, like a Motorola CPU, similar to what was used in the Amiga and Atari ST from around the same period in the early 90s. So it does have a computational limit there. Anyway, let's see what this unit is good at. So off the bat, there's master tune, and if we just go master tune, we can see how we can use this in a live sense, at least while recording. So you can hear our flat string chords there, or mono chords, and then all of a sudden we can take this master tune and we can just detune that instrument in live. You can play around with that and you can get something that adds character to the sound. On the same stroke there's the semitones, so we can go up a full octave, down a full octave, or anywhere in between. So if we just jam this a little, getting into some sort of Vangelis moments there. There we go. Liking that. So you get the idea. We're going to go back to -7. So some great use of transpose and the pitch semitones live. And it does respond well, as you can hear. There's no glitching, and it's quite easy to use the data wheel to go up and down as you will. You can switch from multi to poly to omni. Omni means it will basically trigger off of any channel, but it will only trigger the instrument which you're looking at on a given channel. So let's demo that. Let's go into poly mode. So in multi-mode, the instrument will respond on multiple channels at the same time. So even though we're only looking at channel 10 here at the moment, the other channels will be playing on whatever channels are being sent into the unit. So if I check my sequence here at the minute, I can't quite remember, so let's have a look and see what channel that it's actually sending out on. If we switch to channel 1, we should see the program change. There we go. So on channel 2 you're not going to see that. On channel 1 you're going to see the instruments that are changing there in conjunction with the program change from the sequencer. So if we switch this, when you're in multi-mode you can send to multiple channels if you wanted. In poly mode this again, you can see it's responding on channel 1. If we switch to channel 2, you won't hear the sound. You have to be on the channel which is being received, and you need to be viewing it here for you to hear the sound. So when we switch back to channel 1, we can hear the sound. For instance, you could have multiple. This is a point which is quite powerful for this instrument of this era, is that if we had, this is one sequence on channel 1, we could have alternate sequences on all of 16 channels, which are quite basic, as in for playing notes like this, strings for instance. But when we switch channels, it will play the given sequence in real time, so we can do a live remix just by switching channels here. That's quite powerful. What you might find that you'd like to do to utilize that function is to have the same pattern on each of the 16, or say, let's make it simple, put it on the first 4 tracks, so channels 1 to 4. On your sequencer you have this identical pattern on channel 1, 2, 3 and 4, but the difference is your program change numbers per note on each individual channel are different, so therefore you'll be playing a different instrument for each note on each channel. Yeah, so you would, in advance you would go in and find instruments that suit the mood of the music you're trying to produce, but then once you've set that up on your 4 channels, you can play your sequence, switch between the 4 channels here live on the interface just by dialing this knob, and there you are, live remix. So you can have a string noise with different instruments, same again with different instruments, same again. And one of these sequences may be more lush in comparison to the next one, may have more resonance, the next one may be a completely different sound altogether. So there you go, same sequence, a few different program changes, and we've got a live remix on really up to 16 channels, at least for basic sequences without too much MIDI data going on. But that's very powerful on these units. The modes, the MIDI modes, actually work in conjunction with your playing. So I found basically Omni mode and Poly mode are definitely my favourite modes. Like I say, each has their own strength. Omni mode is for me what I would use if I wanted to play a single channel, a single instrument, such as this sequence that we've got here as a demonstration. So simple notes and the program change. And like I say, if we wanted to do like a live remix, all we need to do is switch to this Poly mode, and we have got a live remix function. Like I say, we're not hearing the input to track number 1 now, we are only listening to the input of track number 2, or MIDI channel 2. So let's just pause there. I'm going to set up a second MIDI track so we can demonstrate exactly what I've just spoke about with the program changes. Go into the tracker here, I can do it relatively fast, so I'm going to copy. For the sake of the video, I will cut this and we'll be back with you in a minute. At the moment we can hear our original sequence, which you're familiar with by now, and because we're monitoring channel 1, but we also have an identical sequence running on channel 2 now, but with different program change instruments per key. So let's just switch to 2 now and see how we get on with the remix. Yeah, so different tones there coming in, and you've got the freedom of switching between channel 1 and 2 for every single note in advance or in the flow of the music. So just with 2 channels there now, we've got a similar range of sounds, but at the end of the day I can change this knob while we're recording and we're bringing out all these other tones. Great, so imagine that over 6 channels or 4 channels, and we can switch here live. We can actually produce music which is a little bit randomized, but at the same time we can go in and program this so it is closer to your end goals. When I program patches, sometimes the patch and the consecutive patch I make so the change is not so big, it's more of a gradual change, so the tone might be in the same range of sounds. So I know when I'm programming these remixes that basically the tone on the next program change and the next one, they may follow in some sort of fashion at least. It's a key of programming these really, is so your wave steps are not too different, although anything goes. On this 3rd track here I'm going to spin the dial quite a way, so it would probably give me tones that are a mile away from where we were. That's it, we've got 3 tracks now. I'm going to play them. I'm going to channelize to channel 1 first. You're familiar with this sequence and the program change instruments. I'm going to use the data knob to switch now and remix to channel 2 live while it's playing, and then channel 3 as well. Also channel 4 can be used as a mute, or it could have any of the ones that are not being used can be used as a mute for the track. So you see what's going on with channel 3 at the minute. It doesn't seem to be accepting program change, and I think that's basically been set up in the menu here somewhere. So let's check for that. Should all be on. Oh. Meh. So why don't it work? Let's have a look, see what's going on. Explains it. So I've had a look at the sequencer here. Let's get back into pattern mode. We'll unmute those tracks. So we've got tracks 6, 7 and 8 with a similar sequence, but unfortunately this sequencer will only send program changes on one given channel. Hoping they'll improve that soon. But you can get where I'm going with this here. So we could have had separate program changes on different tracks. But anyway, we're going to show you the remix function, which is not really a remix function, but it's basically just a way of using it. So instead of having a program changes on tracks 2 and 3 there, we're just going to have a static sound that we're going to pre-configure. So let's play this. We know track 1 we've got program changes going on here because the sequencer allows us to do that for one channel. So there we go. There's also some MIDI modulation wheel and stuff being sent at the same time. That's great. So let's carry on. Track 2. So we've changed track 2 to this more percussive style sound. Track 3, yeah, so knowing the sequencer has a few limitations there at the moment, we're gonna just settle with a different instrument per track rather than a different track with 3 or 4 different instruments with the program changes. But track number 1 has the program changes. So let's see what you can do now. Just three channels, 1 sequence, a bunch of instruments, and 1 knob that's live. So we can switch between these now. So there we go. So there we go. So we've got a remix style function here for this sequence now. Obviously, if this was a track within other tracks on a song, then you can really build up some layering with this, and obviously number 4 can be mute if there was nothing selected. So you can jam along your other tracks on your DAW or with your other live instruments. So on top of that, let's try something else. We go across to the waveforms. There's the 2 waveforms. So you can pick one of the waveforms, and while it's playing, we can change this to a different waveform. You can literally kind of wave sequence through the synthesizer's built-in waveforms in real time. So we can really change the tone of the sound while it's being played. Obviously, the waveforms are being put through the same filter sequence. The LFOs and all that that's previously programmed in won't change by changing the waveforms, but you'll just end up in a different carrier for the patch. So you can see a lot of possibilities all of a sudden open up. See, a lot more random than the previous method that I showed you, using the program change and different instruments that are set up the channel for this remix. But again, this is another way of remixing and getting quite a varied tones as we flick through. Quite satisfying actually. On top of that, we can go into the filter section. It's quite a way through, as you can see. Here's the filter section. So there's filter 1 and 2, or primary and secondary. It's 1 for each waveform. See if we can find something that's pleasant, like a live filter remix. It takes a bit more finesse and knowing what your programs are really to use this part. So in this is the filter section. So we're in the filter section now. We can do the same thing. can manually change the filters in real time, at least between the notes that are being played, to vary the texture, the tones, and also the LFOs and everything in the matrix that are playing the Z-plane filter will either hit or miss on what you would naturally find by the ear as a nice tone, or something that's, for instance, up here you can have something that's a little bit distorted and not so pleasant to the ear, but as you discover through these, you'll find different tones from these different filters. There's so many of them built in. You can more or less always find something pleasing. There you go, so live filter changes. Obviously if you used to switch to the secondary filter and change this as well, so 185. Right, so moving into we're in the second filter now, so you just literally go from one filter to the other, choose a different filter. And we've moved away completely from what we originally had programmed, just in a matter of a few dials of the knob there. Obviously at the same time we can always go back to any of the other waveform selection, and we can change really any of these things in real time while the instrument's playing without too much problems. So let's look at the transpose within the patch itself rather than the main transpose. We've got the master transpose, semitones, and also the micro one. Just adds a lot more character. So go back into preset mode. We can dial just across here, and we're in the transpose mode with the pitch, coarse pitch and transpose. Let's just play around with that. Obviously your plus 24, 36 for instance is always going to be in tune with what you're doing. And the minuses, pretty quick to dial in live. So let's try -5. This will give us a chord. So there you go, we've got quite a dynamic performance going on just with a few controls here. Obviously during a performance, at least while you're recording, you can flick in and out of these modes. So you've seen some of the functions there, they're pretty hands-on really, even though with one dial there's a lot of changes that you can make for the sound that's coming out. So without getting into all these different analog controls. This is one of the envelope functions, so at the minute it shows Alt volume envelope. You can actually change that to on and off. Basically the volume envelope for the waveforms has one built in or an alternative, so if you switch it to alternative then you can use the attack, hold, decay, sustain, release, AHDSR for primary and secondary waveforms. So if we switch that off, you can still see them, however they won't actually be active. So on the doubling detune function, you can thicken or add some detuning to your instruments. Again, can be made on the unit while it's playing. It is quite a subtle effect. It depends on what you've got loaded. So let's just have another quick look at the filters before we finish this video. We've seen quite a few things already, and we're going to try and make the videos a little bit shorter, otherwise we're going to be going into hours. So the filter modes, so there's the filter primary and a secondary filter, up to 197 filters. It's actually 198 when you count 0, which is nothing. The Ultra Proteus has more. There's about another 20 something more, I think. You have to look in the manual and see, or fire one up. I got one in the other room. So in patch or preset, we go in, we start off obviously on the name, but we dial across to the filter section. Here we are. Now there's multiple filter section pages, and they also tie in with the modulation matrix, function generators and LFOs and envelopes. But here's the basic page. So per instrument, waveform 1 and 2 or primary, secondary, there is a filter, so we can choose that filter. Yeah, it's the E-mu Morpheus. It's a nice instrument. So there we go, a lot of functions that can be made just with some of the basic settings. Let's have one last look at the filter section. So after the main filter types comes the level. It's pretty self-explanatory. However, you might find tweaking this can change how the filter sounds while you're playing it. You can lead the sound into more grungy or a resonant area, so you will see as you're playing it by adjusting filter levels. There's also a morph offset. You can set your morph offset at either maximum or minimum of 255 steps, or somewhere in the middle. Depends what you want to do with it, because you can drive the morph offset using the function generators. We'll go into that at a later time. Same thing with filter frequency track. So filter frequency track is in steps of 255 to 0. Again, this basically is used to pick the filter frequency track within the Z-plane filter cube in conjunction with morph offset. Then there's a transform 2. So you can almost think of this is like a cube box. You're moving up and down, left and right, side to side. The reverse, obviously, when you're progressing through the cube, you're basically either going forwards through the cube or backwards through the cube. You can set that using the reverse. And then we're sort of out of the filter section now, but we're going to see how these other functions can affect the filter itself, the parameters that you've just seen. So we're just going to go straight into the real-time control and note-on control. You can see straight away there we have from 1 to 9 in note-on control, and also from 1 to 9 in real-time control, giving 2 9s or 18 destinations to use in conjunction with the different parameter sections. So for instance, velocity on and off, going to the filter level. So rather than using another method to increase the or decrease the level of a sound, you can actually use filter level with a velocity amount of plus 56, say, will give you what you would expect from a velocity to volume. This is the destination, this is the source. So basically we're going to choose the velocity source. We'll have a look what sources and destinations there are. So you've got pitch, secondary pitch, primary, secondary, volume. This is what I was saying. So you've got velocity to volume, gives a completely different effect. You've also got primary and secondary, so you can affect the different waveforms independently. But I found in programming these gives sort of a better effect. Volume change is filter level, so filter level primary and secondary, or just both. Velocity to filter level. So that's a great one because you can, with velocity, have the sound change in level by driving the filter rather than just changing the volume. So let's have a look at the other filter destinations. The frequency track, as we've already seen, the parameter, so you can use velocity to modulate the frequency track, and this is the amount, so it'd be a positive amount or a negative amount. This was set to like a gradient amount of a mid position, so we'll look more closely at this in a later video, but for now we're just going to quickly go through and see how what we can map from velocity to the filter. You can see there's the transform 2 amount, it's the same thing, plus or minus, and that's per primary or secondary transform. So you've got the transform 2, the frequency track, the filter level. Also there's one called tone. So there's 4 destinations and a 5th one there with a morph. The morph setting is also to do with filter transforms. So if we switch to our real-time control, we can also see that we can affect morph in real time rather than a note on. So there's a slight difference. For instance, here we can use pitch bend or controller A, B, C, D, pressure, polyphonic pressure. I think that one is in mono pressure, so this one's per key, this one's per channel. LFO 1, 2, auxiliary, function generator 1, 2, and free form function generator, which is in a hyper preset. Again, we'll get into that at a later time. For now, just know that any of these sources act in a similar way to whatever the destination is. So if we have a pitch wheel and we move the wheel, it's going to be the same as if we had control array set to mod wheel and we're moving the wheel, or an LFO, it's moving the wheel. So basically there is a mod wheel. We can have, let's look at the destinations. So basically Morph is the main one within real-time control. It's a bit limited here. You have control of pan, morph, a portamento rate, function generator amounts, auxiliary for attack, decay, LFO, crossfade. But there's enough stuff there once you've combined it all together with note on and real time. On top of that, you've got a foot switch, which is actually a foot switch via MIDI. So here we're back in the note on setup. So we're on control array, which would be effectively the mod wheel, and then we can have any of these destinations, which is quite a lot. It's the most amount of destinations. Now obviously you'd have to be playing the keys to hear what's going on when you're going through these and setting the different parameters. But essentially you can have quite a few different ways of modulating the tone within the Morpheus itself. So, and some of the basic controller inputs are some of the best because they're very accessible, such as velocity and aftertouch. It doesn't require a lot of crazy setting up at the user end for when you want to play this. So you're just dealing with functions that are built into most keyboard controllers, so nothing out of the ordinary. So a mod wheel can be used to control pitch, although we've got a dedicated controller for that, right? We've got pitch, but there's nothing to stop you from having pitch wheel set up and also mod wheel set up with a lesser amount of pitch. So you could pitch wheel a full pitch bend range, and then on the mod wheel it just change it by this percentage here. So it can give you some subtle effects, such as similar to when we're in master mode with the master tune setting, using the pitch bend or the mod wheel to get this detune amount effectively. So it's a good use straight away there. Right, I think for the next video we need to get the keyboard plugged in so we can actually play and listen to what's going on. But I hope you appreciate these modules by Dave Rossum and the team at E-mu back in the day. I've certainly enjoyed using these modules over the years, and see you in the next video. Look at that, 1993, definitely one of the years that I remember as being pretty good for technology and stuff like that. In the past, this was one of the, I think, pioneering synthesizers of the day. It is digital, but at the same time has some very forward-thinking Z-plane filters on board, which I'm thinking the team back in the day, very good use of the technology that they had for digital synths, and much different from other manufacturers around that time. So you can hear the synthesizer sounds great in the mix. It's one of the main things. It does sound good in the mix. That's enough for the first video. See you in the next video. All about the Morpheus.